welcome to this fabulous artist legal cafe. We are so pleased and grateful to have you in this space. Happy Tuesday, March 3rd. So the Artist Legal Cafe is a partnership between our three organizations, Vital Arts and Movement Law, which is a radical initiative to equip individual artists, artist collectives, and arts organizations to not only survive, but we want y'all to thrive as well. This is a space where we offer free direct legal services and capacity building trainings every single month. And a little bit about the Sustainable Economies Law Center, Movement Law, and Vital Arts. The Sustainable Economies Law Center, we love to provide legal support to individuals and groups who are working to create new solutions for resilient local economies. And we also provide additional legal cafes outside of our artist cafes. So if you are in need of more legal advice, legal information, please feel free to join our website, hop on our website and RSVP. We'll drop those links in the chat. Vital Arts envisions a world in which groundbreaking arts and culture that are essential for the continued health and vitality of society at large are recognized and cultivated. They seek to bring this about by implementing projects to meet the needs of low-income artists in the Bay Area. And then Movement Law, led by Hope Mohr, is client-centered law practice, which is dedicated to supporting artists, changemakers, and mission-driven organizations. Okay, and for our land acknowledgement, we'd like to begin by acknowledging that we exist on land that was once stolen from its indigenous occupants and forcibly colonized for the purpose of resource control and financial profit. In this process, the land and people that belonged to it were displaced, subjected to cruel and inhumane treatment, including forced migration, enslavement, and the stripping of their rights and destruction of their cultural identity. We recognize that this imperialist and colonial destruction is ongoing, and we urge you to support Indigenous organizations and individuals who are working to repair their legacies and lineages. Chitenyo Olone, Karken Olone, Bay Miwok, Plains Miwok, Delta Yokut, and Napian Pantwin are among some of the tribes who historically occupied this land long before the first ever Spanish settlers arrived. Here are some of our Indigenous resources and organizations that we recommend to support: Sogorea Land Trust, Native Land, and Ramaytush.org. And I would like to kick it off to Hope Mohr.
Thanks, Hope Williams. Hi, everybody. My name is Hope Mohr. I use she, her pronouns. I am white. I have dark hair that is streaked with gray, and I'm wearing a purple collared shirt. I am both an artist and an attorney, and as Hope Williams said, I am proud to co-lead the Artist Legal Cafe. I am a fellow with SELC, and I have a practice called Movement Law that focuses on building power with artists. I want to say that this presentation is not legal advice, but rather general information. It's based on my work as a lawyer with many arts organizations, and also based on my personal experience co-stewarding the transition of an arts nonprofit to a model of shared leadership. I want to give a shout out to Nicole Wires with the Nonprofit Democracy Network for her thought partnership on this presentation. And I will be moving fast, but don't worry, the slides will be available afterwards, so you do not have to write everything down. So one tactic for building cultural worker power is organizational transformation. And we all know that this work has to be met by field-wide change on the funding level and on the legislative level. But today we're going to be focused on organizational evolution. So before we get talking about that, I want to first talk about what is an organization. And it's important to distinguish three elements of an organization. One is your entity type, the cake. On the state level, this could be you're a nonprofit, you're an LLC, you're a cooperative. Then there is the icing on the cake, which is your tax status. And then there are your internal policies, which is our focus today. And there are three important points here. One is you can mix and match cake and icing and policies in lots of different ways. Two is no matter what kind of entity you are, you can bake democracy into your cake. And three, there is no cookie cutter model of worker leadership. These models are emergent, iterative, and really specific to your mission and your community. So, worker leadership can manifest in many different organizational containers. It can manifest as a worker self-directed nonprofit, a cooperative corporation, a unionized nonprofit, an LLC run like a cooperative. There are a myriad of hybridities. And today we're not focused on your legal entity choice as much as the policy elements of your organization. That said, many of my comments are directed at folks working in the nonprofit context. I will say that transitioning to worker leadership in the nonprofit context can happily coexist with unionization. So, how you begin really determines the journey, and there are different pathways to worker leadership. And your journey will be determined by many factors, some of which include who initiates the change. Is it your ED, your staff, your board? Is the transition part of a natural leadership exit? Is it initiated through an organizing effort? Do you have board buy-in or is there board antagonism? Um, Depending on all of these factors, the transition to worker leadership may require dismantling, building, or some combination of the two. So, what exactly are you dismantling or building? You are building or dismantling both structure and culture. Transitioning to worker leadership is both structural and cultural work, and there is a synergy between the two, and it's very important to do both. So here are some examples of the kinds of structural and cultural changes that are involved in a transition to worker leadership. And structural change must be rooted in cultural change in order for it to be meaningful. So on the left, you'll see some examples of structural change, your pay structure, how decisions are made, your staff leadership structure, the distribution of power as between board and staff, your bylaws that operationalize all of the above, your job titles, your job descriptions, structure. On the right-hand side, you will see examples of the cultural change and culture building work that has to go into this kind of transition. And this is how work actually gets done in your organization. Number one is relationships. You have to build a culture of beneficial relationships premised on respect, healthy communications, accountability. The transition to worker leadership often involves a shift from a culture of personality to a culture of community, a culture of control to a culture of trust, a culture of efficiency to a culture of democracy. So this is a big slide. It's probably the most important slide of the presentation. Um, these are steps on the journey in no particular order. And democratizing an organization takes a lot of time and money. In an ideal world, you create a dedicated space and time to focus on the work because it is not going to happen in a regular staff meeting. It is not going to happen in a regular board meeting. I've heard folks say that if you're doing this work, you need to dedicate 30% of organizational time to it. In my own experience, that percentage was much higher at times. But we all know that the reality is you may not have a lot of dedicated time or money to put to democratizing your organization. And that is okay. There are still many ways to start the work. And any of these steps can move the needle. Any of these steps can move you forward on the journey. And again, each of these steps has both structural and cultural components, and I'm going to talk us through them. The first one is talking about values, number one. So, worker leadership has to start with values. When you are trying to change an organizational system, if the root values have not changed, the new system will just grow to look like the old system. If the work is happening on a superficial level, only on the level of optics, it's going to result in a lot of broken trust, and it's really going to undermine the journey. So, truly, the first step in the work is often a conversation about values. And often this work includes anti-racism work because whenever you talk about power and power sharing, there is always an overlay of race, gender, and class. And the organization has to develop cultural competency to navigate these difficult conversations. So often a first step includes hiring a facilitator to hold space for that conversation. This is the iceberg that sinks organizational change. Conversations around transitioning to worker leadership have to acknowledge if there is a disconnect between an organization's aspirational values and how things actually get done. And this can be a difficult conversation. And really, this work is full of difficult conversations, so it's good just to embrace that. If you don't have them, again, the work won't be meaningful. So again, the need for a facilitator is often present early on and throughout. So step number 2 is democratizing decision making. Democratizing how decisions are made is one of the most important parts of cultivating a worker-led organization. And there are a ton of resources out there to help support this work. I'm going to uplift especially the resources that are offered by the Nonprofit Democracy Network, which you can find on their website. Again, they have just a ton of resources around democratizing decision making. So I really encourage you to check those out. But one particular tool I'm going to talk about briefly around democratizing your decisions is having a decision-making matrix. This is a great place to start. It doesn't have to look like this. This is just one example. But the matrix sets forth all of the kinds of decisions that are being made in your organization. So you can see in the left-hand column here all the different kinds of decisions. Who is at the table making those decisions? And how the decision will be made, the decision-making rule. So consensus, majority, whatever. I really recommend that you have some version of this matrix in your bylaws. But this is a tool that should evolve over time. And in the journey to worker leadership, over time, more and more decision-making power can be delegated to workers. Okay, now we're going to number 3, developing your board as a partner in democracy. Now, again, depending on where you begin in this journey, whether or not you have board buy-in, if you don't have board buy-in, this may be where you start. And this is really culture building work with your board, first and foremost. So the first thing to do is start a conversation with your board. Um, Once you get your board into a conversation, often the first question a board may have is, can we do this under the law? If you are a nonprofit, can we become a worker self-directed nonprofit? And the answer is yes. There are rules about nonprofit boards, but within those rules, there is a ton of flexibility. And California law does not mandate a traditional top-down board structure. So organizations can design governance that reflects worker direction as long as the board retains ultimate fiduciary responsibility. So boards may delegate their duties, they just can't over-delegate them. As long as the board still exercises control and can take back that control as necessary to ensure organizational well-being, it's cool. So how do you do this, you might ask? The structural move in a nonprofit is through a board resolution. In a worker self-directed nonprofit, the board delegates management to self-governing workers while providing oversight to ensure that the system is functioning in the best interest of the nonprofit. Again, a lot of culture building work has to support this kind of structural move in order for it to be successful. Once the board understands that it is legally permissible to transition to a worker leadership, you may also need to make the case to them that it is actually a good idea. I'm not going to read through all of these reasons, but suffice it to say there are a ton of both moral imperatives and business imperatives as to why worker leadership is a fantastic idea. And again, you will have the slides, so you can use this as a resource if you do need to, in fact, make the case to your board. Okay, some structural moves with your board include clarifying board terms and enforcing them so that perhaps if the board has folks on the board who are not supportive of this transition, it may be time to facilitate a graceful exit. And if you clarify board terms, that can support that kind of work. Simultaneously, you can be growing the board to include allies of democracy, increasing artist and staff representation on your board, creating staff elected board seats, and passing that board resolution to become a worker self-directed nonprofit. And now I want to lift up some resources that the Sustainable Economies Law Center has, a ton of resources about how boards can navigate the transition to becoming a worker self-directed nonprofit. Um, and SELC also has a bylaws toolkit for worker self-directed nonprofits so that you can operationalize all these changes in your bylaws. And here is a sample board resolution. I'm not going to read it, blah, 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 but this is what it looks like. This would be passed by your board to make it so. Again, there is a sample board resolution also available on the SELC website. We're going to go back to all of these steps on the journey. We're down at step number 4, which is power mapping, which is a great tool because if you're going to redistribute power, first you need to know where it sits. And power mapping is a great tool to facilitate that conversation. You need to name all the areas of power in the organization. Some examples here on the left. Polling staff to get people's opinions about where power sits, because often there are disparities of perception, and that in itself is something to talk about. And then once you do that mapping, then you can get to column on the right, which is how do we want to redistribute the power, and what are some steps to get there. So power mapping is a great tool. Another great tool is increasing accountability in project management. You can do this through a number of different tools. There's the Darcy, there's the Mocha. And down here on the bottom, you can see an example of the Darcy mapped out. This is just one way to democratize how work gets done in your organization. Again, just one tactic. Um, and the three final steps that I'm not going to get too much into today because they're all kind of trainings in themselves. But number 6, which is democratizing money, implementing democracy on the level of staff pay is crucial. This can look like pay equality or pay equity. Again, that's a huge process unto itself, but a crucial conversation. Implementing participatory budgeting, sharing relationships with funders, with staff is huge. And also implementing financial transparency practices within the organization, sharing out budgets. Every budget should be shared out. Those kinds of steps can help you democratize money. Number 7, democratizing meetings, co-creating agendas, rotating facilitation. It might not seem like a big deal, but it actually can make a huge difference in organizational culture. And the last thing I'll say is democratizing curation in the context of an arts organization is absolutely crucial. So that can be done through co-curation among staff, also implementing some form of artist curatorial council so that you're democratizing curatorial power, not only within staff, but also with the community. I want to name some obstacles on the journey. There can be many. This work is really hard. A lot of these obstacles are emotional, they're interpersonal. If you are dealing with a founder-led organization, sometimes there's a lot of self-interest on the part of the founder. They worked so hard to get there. They've been there for decades. Sometimes the staff are less invested. Sometimes there are lots of fears about losing donors and funders. There is an overlay of race often in this work. Often you're dealing with white people who don't know how to share power and white fragility. Sometimes leaders can dump labor into worker laps without doing the culture building and the capacity building work first. So that's something really to look out for. And again, the importance of connecting new leaders with funders is really crucial. That's a really crucial part of the work as well. I just wanted to leave with some final prompts. It's really important to give workers time and space to vision, so folks are not moving into inherited visions. So as you think about sharing power, it's also about sharing visioning. It's also about sharing the narrative of change. So that's a really important piece. It's important that we transform these systems, not just recast and restaff who holds power in existing toxic systems. Again, that goes to the culture building piece. And a really important conversation is also how does this work connect to the art and how does the art inform the work? So I know I just threw a lot at you. If you have questions, here is my email. Feel free to reach out. As I said, I'm also a part of the Artist Legal Cafe team. I'm always here in